All right, let's talk about what's really happening in Europe right now, because the headlines you're seeing, they're only giving you part of the story. From a massive art heist in Paris to China tightening its grip on European industry, and a surprising election result that's got the establishment nervous, there's a lot to unpack today. And trust me, it all connects. I spent years working inside one of the biggest media outlets, watching stories get bent and shaped to fit whatever narrative they wanted to push that week. I walked away from that. Now I'm on my own. I answer to no one, and I tell you what's actually going on. If you value independent voices that aren't being fed talking points from corporate headquarters, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you really want to support what we're building here, consider becoming a channel sponsor. It's people like you who make it possible for me to keep doing this without compromise, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you who steps up. So let's start with France, where they've just arrested two men connected to one of the boldest heists in recent memory. Last week, 8 royal jewels vanished from the Louvre's Apollo Gallery. We're talking about pieces worth around 88 million euros. That's not pocket change, that's history, culture, irreplaceable artifacts just gone. Now, one of these suspects was grabbed at Charles de Gaulle Airport as he was about to board a flight to Algeria. The other was picked up in Saint-Denis, a suburb of Paris. Both men live in the Paris suburbs, and investigators believe they're part of a 4-person crew. The other 2 are still out there, and authorities say they're closing in fast. Here's where it gets interesting. France's Interior Minister, Bruno Le Roux, congratulated the police on a job well done, but the Paris prosecutor, Laure Becquot, who's actually leading the investigation, she's not happy. Why? Because the arrests leak to the media way too fast. In her world, that's a problem. It can compromise the investigation, tip off accomplices, mess up the whole operation. So you've got one hand of the government celebrating while the other is frustrated. Classic bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the Louvre isn't taking any chances. They've moved part of their jewelry collection to the vaults of the Bank of France. And when I say vaults, I mean vaults. This facility sits 27 meters below ground, right under the bank's headquarters in central Paris, and it holds 90% of France's gold reserves. That's the level of security we're talking about here, but it raises a question, doesn't it? If these pieces are so valuable, so irreplaceable, why weren't they better protected in the first place? Where was this level of security before the theft? Now, staying in France but shifting gears completely, there's another story making waves in the art world, and this one's all about money and mystique. A portrait of Dora Maar, Picasso's muse, partner, and by all accounts, an incredibly patient woman given his, let's say, complex personality, just sold at auction for 32 million euros. The painting, titled Bust of a Woman in a Flowered Hat, dates back to 1943 and has been hidden away in a private collection for 80 years. Suddenly it surfaces, goes under the hammer, and boom, 32 million. Art experts are losing their minds over this thing, talking about how the colors are so perfectly preserved. It's as if Picasso just stepped away from the canvas yesterday. No varnish, no restoration tricks, just raw 1940s authenticity. The auctioneer is beaming because the price blew past expectations. There was global interest, buyers from New York to Tokyo competing for it. But in the end, whoever had the deepest pockets walked away with Dora Maar staring back at them from their wall. And look, I'll be honest with you, I see this painting and I think, okay, that's Picasso's vision. But 32 million? For that? You try to say anything skeptical about modern art prices and you immediately get labeled as someone who just doesn't understand art. Maybe I don't. Or maybe the market for high-end art has become so detached from reality that we've stopped asking whether something is actually worth what we're paying for it. Just a thought. If you're finding this useful, if you're getting information here you're not seeing elsewhere, go ahead and drop a like on this video. Share it with someone who wants to know what's really going on. Let's keep growing this community. All right, let's move to Germany, where consumers are being warned to brace themselves for a serious hit to their wallets, and the culprit is avian flu. This isn't some minor outbreak we're talking about. Bird flu has spread rapidly across virtually every federal state in Germany, and the consequences are about to ripple through the entire poultry market. There's already been massive culling of infected birds, which means less supply hitting the markets. But it gets worse. Farms in high-risk zones are banned from selling their products entirely, which further restricts what's available. The German Poultry Association is warning that prices are going to spike, especially during the Christmas season when ducks and geese are in high demand. And here's the kicker: they're blaming migratory cranes for bringing the disease into the country. So now you've got containment measures spreading in wider and wider circles. And no one can say when they'll be able to lift these restrictions because no one knows when the disease will be fully under control, if it can be fully controlled. The situation is grim for private owners and farmers who are watching their livelihoods disappear. Volunteers in protective gear spent days collecting bird remains, but the sheer volume became overwhelming. Now government workers have had to step in because the volunteers simply couldn't keep up. Think about that for a second. There are so many losses that volunteers, people who showed up to help out of the goodness of their hearts, they can't physically handle it anymore. This is a real crisis, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better. The key now is stopping the spread, but whether that's actually possible, well, that remains to be seen. Now here's a story that should alarm anyone paying attention to global economics and national security. China is forcing German companies to hand over their commercial secrets in exchange for access to raw materials. Yeah, you heard that right. Beijing is requiring German firms to provide detailed data about their operations, production plans, customer information, photographs, and even 3-year forecasts, just to get permission to import rare earth metals. These are materials absolutely essential for producing electric vehicles, turbines, and military equipment. What China is effectively doing is getting a complete blueprint of Germany's industrial weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, its strategic dependencies. And German companies, they can't refuse. Why? Because 95% of the rare earth elements used in Germany come from China. That's a higher percentage than any other country in the European Union. Without these materials, factories shut down. The auto industry grinds to a halt. Manufacturing collapses. You're looking at economic paralysis. This week, German media reported that Volkswagen production lines were on the verge of stopping after Beijing temporarily restricted exports of certain components. Just like that, one of Germany's biggest companies, a pillar of its economy, nearly brought to its knees because China decided to turn the faucet off for a bit. And here's the really troubling part. The German government admits it doesn't even have basic information about what's happening. The Ministry of Economy tried to gather data by reaching out to companies, but most of them didn't respond. Think about that. The government doesn't know. The companies won't talk. And China keeps tightening the screws. This isn't just an economic issue, this is a sovereignty issue. When another country can dictate whether your industries operate or not, you've lost control. And Germany, for all its engineering prowess and economic might, is in a deeply vulnerable position right now. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Are we watching Europe sleepwalk into dependence on a power that doesn't share its values? Or is this just business as usual in a globalized world? I want to hear your take. So what's the response from Brussels? Well, Ursula von der Leyen, head of the European Commission, just announced that the EU is working full speed on a strategy to reduce dependence on Chinese critical raw materials. This new strategy is a direct response to China's decision back in October to impose stricter restrictions on rare earth metal exports. The goal, according to von der Leyen, is to secure access to alternative sources of critical materials, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, for European industry. The EU plans to accelerate partnerships with countries like Ukraine, Australia, Canada, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Chile, and even Greenland. Right now, more than 90% of the rare earth metals and magnets consumed in Europe come from China. So the risks here are enormous for Europe's most strategic industries. We're talking automotive, defense, green technology, digital sectors. All of it depends on materials that one country controls. Von der Leyen is basically saying, we have a plan to get out from under this dependency as quickly as possible, because if we don't, the consequences will be dire. And she's right. The plan will apparently be announced soon, and the EU is going to focus on everything from joint procurement to stockpiling reserves. It's a massive undertaking. But here's my question. Why did it take this long? China's dominance over rare earth materials isn't new. This has been building for years, and now only after Beijing starts squeezing, only after production lines start shutting down, now we're going to do something about it. This should have been a priority a decade ago. Instead, Europe allowed itself to become almost entirely dependent on a geopolitical rival, and now they're scrambling. On top of all that, the European Commission has just accused TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram of violating the Digital Services Act. According to Brussels, these platforms are restricting access to data and making it difficult for users to report illegal content. The social media companies have been given a chance to review the preliminary findings and submit written responses. If the violations are confirmed, they're looking at fines up to 6% of their global annual revenue. That's billions of dollars potentially on the line. This is part of a broader push by the EU to rein in big tech, to force these platforms to be more transparent, more accountable. Whether it actually works or just turns into another round of fines that these companies write off as a cost of doing business, we'll see. But the message is clear. Brussels is trying to assert control over an industry that's largely operated without meaningful oversight for years. Now let's talk about Ireland, because there's an election result that's got some people very uncomfortable. An independent candidate named Catherine Connolly has won a convincing victory in Ireland's presidential election. And the reason this matters is because Connolly, who's 68 years old, is sharply, and I mean sharply, critical of both the European Union and the United States. She opposes the EU's plans to increase military spending, and she's been vocal in her criticism of the alliance's policies. For supporters of the defense industry, for those who've been pushing Europe toward greater militarization, this is a problem. Connolly, who holds far-left views, gained strong support among young voters after she accused the government's policies of fueling the housing crisis. So now you've got a new leader on the political stage who's not playing by the establishment's rules, who's questioning the direction Europe is heading, and who's got a mandate from voters who are clearly fed up with the status quo. It's going to be interesting to see how the mainstream media handles this. What label will they slap on her? How will they try to frame her opposition to increased military spending? Because make no mistake, anyone who stands in the way of that agenda gets targeted. But for now, she's in, and she's got a platform. And finally, let's touch on something that's lighting up social media right now, though it's more spectacle than substance. Donald Trump landed in Malaysia and couldn't resist joining in when he saw performers dancing near Air Force One. So there he is, the President of the United States, dancing on the tarmac. The video's everywhere. It's been shared millions of times, and reactions are, well, exactly what you'd expect, deeply divided. Some people think it's charming, humanizing, shows he's not afraid to let loose. Others think it's unpresidential, undignified, not the image a world leader should project. Personally, I think it's a distraction. There are serious issues happening right now, conflicts, economic crises, shifting alliances, and we're all watching a guy dance on a runway. But that's the game, isn't it? Keep people focused on the performance, on the personality, and maybe they won't pay as much attention to the policies. Trump understands that better than most. Whether you love him or hate him, he knows how to dominate a news cycle. And while everyone's talking about his dance moves, there are decisions being made, deals being cut, power being exercised behind the scenes. Don't lose sight of that. So let's recap what we've covered here, because there's a lot to process. We started with France, where 2 suspects in the Louvre heist are in custody, but 2 more are still out there, and the prosecutors frustrated that details leaked too soon. Then we looked at a Picasso portrait selling for 32 million euros, raising questions about the art market's disconnect from reality. Germany's facing a bird flu crisis that's going to drive up poultry prices and strain an already fragile agricultural sector. China is leveraging its control over rare earth materials to extract commercial secrets from German companies, putting Europe's industrial base at risk. The EU, led by Ursula von der Leyen, is scrambling to reduce dependence on China, but it's a plan that should have been in motion years ago. Brussels is going after big tech platforms for violating digital services laws, with billions in fines potentially at stake. Ireland just elected an independent president who opposes EU militarization, shaking up the establishment. And Trump danced on a tarmac in Malaysia, giving everyone something to argue about while the real work of governing continues elsewhere. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. This is the kind of coverage you won't get from the mainstream outlets, because they're too busy chasing clicks and following scripts handed down from corporate. If this resonated with you, if you got value from it, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you really want to help keep this going, consider becoming a channel sponsor. It's the support from people like you that allows me to keep doing this without bending to anyone's agenda. I don't take that lightly, and I appreciate every single one of you who steps up. The world's moving fast, and the story's always bigger than what they're telling you. I'll keep digging, keep connecting the dots, and keep bringing you what matters. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.